All right, welcome to Cwic Week for October 4th, 2021. Here's what we're covering in this episode. I'm going to go back another week because we did not get a Cwic Week out last week. I'm going to recap just a couple points on my interview with Ben Pacini on civility and his what he brought up in terms of critical race theory. I think there's a couple of important points there. Secondly, we're going to go over the Black National Anthem, the episode we did there. Third, the education's war on men. A couple of important points we need to cover there. We've got some comments in there as well that were given from followers. I want you to hear what they had to say. And then finally, the Washington Post magazine article entitled The Rise of the Liberal Latter-day Saint. This was written by Emily Kaplan, and I want to follow up on a couple of comments that she made about the article, as well as I've got a short clip on a podcast that she was on. So back to Ben Pacini. If you listen to that episode, there were a couple of points that were brought up about critical race theory. This was not a topic that we originally were going to cover. But first of all, I think one of the important points is that he talks about his anti-racism. I want to talk a little bit about language in regards to this, especially with critical race theory. This language that is being brought in from academia and beginning to go into the corporate world and all of the other institutions, such as the term anti-racism, that is owned by a far left ideology. And so they determine the meaning of that. You can come in, as Ben did, and say, my anti-racism is XYZ or this. But in the end, those that are the pushers of this ideology and this language, they already own the meaning and the definition of what anti-racism is. You can't get beyond Ibram Kendi and him using the term anti-racism. He's the one who's brought this into real popularity, even though he's pulling it all the way back from Kimberly Crenshaw, who is the one who coined critical race theory. So by using the terminology, and I'm not saying he shouldn't, but by using the terminology and just saying my anti-racism, you are automatically bringing in the pregnant meaning of what anti-racism is, along with what you think you're saying. And so even though I am sure that Ben Pacini does not espouse Ibram Kendi's anti-racism, I don't think he does, the clear definition from Ibram Kendi, going back to Kimberly Crenshaw, of anti-racism is activism. It is outright activism. It is not me talking about, hey, racism is bad. That's a very tiny little slice of what anti-racism is. And this is an important thing to understand, because as we bring new words and vocabulary into the language of pop culture, then you've got to know what's really behind it. Because if it's just spoken in a cursory manner, then we can be talking about completely different things once you get into education. Once you get into, well, what is the anti-racism that is being taught in schools, for example? And if you think you know what anti-racism is and that it's just being against racism, then you're going to say, yeah, well, this is good. But what does it really mean? What is the background to it? What is the DNA, the etymology of the meaning of the word itself? These are important things to consider. And I don't think in that instance that Ben realizes that. I do think he was a great guest, and he had a lot of very good points in talking about his kind of shtick, which is civility. Now, moving on to the Black National Anthem, I want to talk about some fallout from Bill Maher's statement and some of the things that he said that I covered in that episode. There was an article written in Forbes magazine by Dana Brownlee entitled, "Here's Why Bill Maher is Dead Wrong on the Black National Anthem." If you didn't see that episode or listen to that episode, basically Bill Maher came out and said, appropriately, correctly, that there should not be two different national anthems. Here's what Dana Brownlee says about this. I quote, "On its face, that might sound like an admirable position, not wanting two different national anthems. But the truth is that as many anti-racism topics are, this one is much more nuanced and complex. And yet again, he's dead wrong. I completely disagree with her. She goes on and says, the Black national anthem isn't the problem. It's the symptom of the problem. The solution isn't ridding ourselves of an anthem. The solution is creating a truly equitable society devoid of conditions that made Black people in America feel the need to pen their own anthem in order to feel truly included. That might be an admirable goal, but the Black national anthem does not accomplish that. It doesn't do that at all. It's very interesting here because 2 points that she makes on this. She says, were there a Black person on the program, and there wasn't, viewers could have benefited from a culturally informed perspective. This is the same idea about saying that ideology is only skin deep. If you are Black, you're going to have one opinion. And if you're white, you're going to have a different opinion. There may be a majority in those groups that have those opinions, but there are plenty of Black people. In fact, reading the polling, most Black people do not want a Black national anthem. So what is she saying? What she's saying is the typical postmodern response to all of this, which is if you're white and you have an opinion on something that is the Black national anthem, it's discounted. It really doesn't count. That's not true. I mean, truth is truth. And the truth in this instance is that it is divisive. What do we do next with this? Do we have a Latino national anthem that we also sing at the beginning of each NFL game? I mean, how many Mexican Americans do we have here in the United States? Do we also put up the Mexican flag and sing the Mexican national anthem before? I mean, a lot of the West used to be part of Mexico. Do we need a Native American national anthem? The Latter-day Saints were oppressed and had a lot of horrible things happen to them early on. I'm not equating that to the level of African Americans, but quite a bit of bad things happened to the Latter-day Saints for a very long time. Do we have our own that we want to sing whenever we talk about a national anthem? No, because it's not about the national anthem. It's not something that is unifying for all people. There must be assimilation to good values. And the more you pull that apart, the more there is disassimilation. There are tribes, there are ites. And it's ridiculous to think that you need a Black national anthem. Now, the Black national anthem, Lift Your Voice and Sing, I think is what it's called. I think that's great that people sing it, right? It was written all the way back in 1900. That's great, but it's not a national anthem. She gives a strange example of this. Here's what she says. She says, let's consider an imperfect analogy. Imagine a couple who has been married for 15 years, but for the first 13 years, the husband has been overtly sexist and violently abusive. Then for the final 2 years, he decides that he wants an equal marriage and tells her that he's offended that she continues to sleep in a separate room. Understandably, before even considering cohabitation, she'd expect a significant investment in marriage therapy and active work to acknowledge and repair past harm. Touché, sure. Similarly, many Black and brown people are continuing to navigate a legacy of oppression compounded by ongoing systemic racism that she needs to back that up. And doing so authentically means embracing certain spaces and traditions made specially for us, given a history of well-documented racial hostility. Again, sing the song. That's great. You know, Latter-day Saints have Put Your Shoulder to the Wheel, The Spirit of God Like a Fire is Burning. Those are wonderful things, but they're not national anthems for us, for the United States. If this couple took certain vows to treat each other well, to love one another, for better or for worse, and have a commitment together, and then there were 13 years of the husband treating her poorly, you don't go on and have separate marriage anthems where one is only for her and one is only for him. There may need to be trust built back up. There may need to be charity a lot of charity given, but you go back to the original vows and you live up to them. So I agree with her example. I do not agree with her parallelism here, with her conclusion. Now, on the episode of Education's War on Men, I'm going to be doing another episode on this soon. It's going to go well beyond education. I'm going to give you all of the sources, all of the data. There's a lot there that we all need to understand, as well as a buildup to where we have gotten here on this war on men and why it exists, how the radical feminists back in the 50s and 60s started to really take this on. And that is the strain that has evolved today. This is not your standard, I can't think of her name, Hermione, right, who's out trying to create equality globally for women that are oppressed and that are not given a fair advantage in life. I think, hey, go girl, right? I mean, that's great. Go out and help them. That's a wonderful thing. That's not what this is. This is about oppressing men, actually. It really is. And it's about skewing results. You'll be surprised, I think, at some of the results and data that I'm going to give you on this. I've done some research on this. But a point that needs to be brought up here, I can't remember if I brought this up in the episode there or not, is that underlying these radical identitarian type of intersectionality ideologies that really want to break us out into tribes and break women up away from men and men away from women, in this case, it's always given that equity is the goal. And when we say equity, we're talking about results. The only way you get equity, right? The only way you get equity is through tyranny. It's always the same. That's why in the perfect world, a utopia with all equity, with equal results for everybody, you say that that's the utopia, that's the great thing. That's not the great thing, because what that does is on the other end, it takes away opportunity from people. It takes away the variability of choice and independence and individuality and expression. And you see in all utopian, rather dystopian societies that go for this equitable result, all of those things are always lost, right? You always lose individuality. You lose agency. You lose expression. And then you lose the family. It all goes to the state, ultimately. All of these powers end up going to the state because the state must grab this power in order to force the equitable outcome. So the goal itself is horrible. It's horrific. The goal of equity in practice is a horrific goal. But when you really look at things, it's actually not really the goal. It's the goal until there is an equitable result. Once there's an equitable result, the goal is not equity anymore. The goal is power. And it lets you know that in the very beginning, that's really what it was all about all along. And a great example of this is education, where you have really now 60% of undergraduates, and even more than that in the master's and doctorate programs, 60% women and 40% men in attendance there. And the numbers skew even greater when you're talking about actually getting the diplomas and the degrees. It goes even higher. We are dangerously close. And unless something big happens, we're going to get there in the next several years. We're dangerously close to a 2-to-1 ratio of diplomas for women to diplomas for men. Some of you say, hey, great. It used to be the other way around. Men used to get all the diplomas. There are so many societal issues that harm women in this case. It harms marriage. It harms families. And as I said, there's a lot more data that I'm putting together for this other episode coming up shortly that goes well beyond education that we need to look closer at. And if you've got sons, if you've got a husband, you got a father, these are things you need to know. As an example of someone who is against men and someone who says, look, you're on the other side of the gender chasm here. You're in a different tribe because you're male. Here's what a commenter said on YouTube about this episode. This person says, and why are men who run everything not doing anything for their gender to help them? Well, the answer to that is because they're not given the chance to do that. They're shamed immediately if they fight back. They're shamed immediately if they bring these things up. Why are you involving women? It's not really you're involving women. I never said I was involving women in all of this. I mean, there may be decisions by a number of teachers, the majority of whom may be females, and administrators, the majority of whom may be females. But other than that, there's no involvement of women. The person goes on, I quote, I thought we were supposed to stay in our place concerning men's business. Ridiculous, right? Make this make sense. Or just admit you need us. We do need you. We do need you. We need your help. Just like you need our help. We need each other. And your gender can't do, excuse my French, a damn thing for themselves until you all can admit that. Fix your own problems. I'm busy. Right? So that's someone with that's an ongoing sentiment. I get a lot worse comments than that I have to delete, that are just very vitriolic against men. And maybe people that have had bad experiences. I don't doubt that. But this isn't going to work, right? This is going to break up families. It's going to break up marriages. And this kind of ideology that is so steeped in hate for the opposite gender is disgusting. And it goes the other way too. There are groups of people, it's not as pervasive, but there are groups of people that are male that do the same thing toward women. Here's another comment that I thought was interesting. This person says, your statements about your daughter's award ceremony and the boys wondering, is this for me? My daughter was in an award ceremony, and less than 1 in 5 of those receiving the awards, we're talking 150 people, less than 1 in 5 were boys. Right? The rest were all, over 80% were girls. As they watch girl after girl get awards is almost the exact argument that the left uses for racial politics. That's not the argument. That is the stats, the data they're using. It's not the argument. You are arguing that the system is biased and needs to be renovated to achieve more equal outcomes. I'm saying that's a real possibility. And yes, I would say the exact same thing. If you find something racially where there is a systemic problem, I would like to know about it. I'll help you fight it. The problem isn't that I don't believe that systemic issues can happen. Right? I think that they have. I think that with racial issues, they are mostly gone. Not all of them. Still some things, especially like with prison reform, that we need to work on. But that is not the same thing as saying there is a systemic problem that needs to be fixed. I mean, if you find the systemic issues, then change them. People on the right, as an example, have systemic problems all the time. That's not just on the left. That might be popularized right now with critical race theory and talking about systemic racism. But as an example, if you're on the right, chances are that in the last couple of years of President Obama's presidency, where you had universal health care going into place, my guess is you thought that was pretty systemically a problem. Or if you're on the right, good chance that if you see Biden's policies on immigration, my guess is you think there is a systemic problem with immigration. So it's not an issue just on the left, right? That is not, everybody wants to change things for their own political agenda. I have no problem in saying that there is a systemic problem in education that is affecting boys. Now, I'm not trying to force something, make people do something to equal out the outcome. I'm saying, let's find out where the opportunities are being robbed, if there are any. That's all I'm saying. If boys learn different than girls and we're primarily in a female-oriented classroom, then we might consider making some changes. If there is shame given to the boys over and over again and they're told over and over again to get rid of their misogyny, of their sexism, even when they're little kids. That's a problem. So systems aren't the issue. On that spectrum that Elder Oaks goes over, right, about equality of opportunity and equality of outcome, that's the problem. If there is a disparity in the outcome, what we need to look at is what is going on with opportunity. Is there a problem with opportunity? And if there is a problem there with opportunity, then we need to fix it. That doesn't mean that there aren't other issues. For example, are our families, are our parents not doing something that is helping their boys out enough in school? Is there a problem there in the families? That might be another systemic problem at the family level, at the parent level. But there is a problem, and it's not just education. Again, these stats I'm going to give you here shortly, this week or next, on this episode about boys and men, is very concerning. It's all one piece. Education is just a little slice of the pie with what's going on right now. Lastly, we had the episode in the Washington Post magazine from Emily Kaplan entitled "The Rise of the Liberal Latter-day Saint." Now, two things I want to cover on this. One, again, goes back to Elder Holland's talk. This is just regurgitated. This is the problem with journalism today. People regurgitate things that they hear or the sentiment that's out there, and they don't back it up with an analysis or critical thinking at all. Here's just one example again from the article talking about his talk. It says, I quote, "And more recently there was a profound sense of betrayal when Apostle Jeffrey Holland, long considered one of the more liberal leaders of the church, urged the faculty of Brigham Young University, the flagship campus of the university run by the church, to take up metaphorical musket fire against peers." Why did she say musket fire? He didn't say, I don't think he said musket fire. I think he said muskets. Muskets in one hand, trowels in the other, right? Metaphorical musket fire against peers who show public support for gay Latter-day Saints. Again, incredibly irresponsible. So you're saying that they should be shooting metaphorically at their own peers there at Brigham Young University if those people support gay Latter-day Saints. That's wrong. See, that somebody's not checking her in writing this. It's very obvious that is not what Elder Holland said. It's frustrating to me that these types of things are written at such high-profiled outlets like the Washington Post. And you feel like you can go ahead and say these things. There's no checks and balances in most of these media venues. It's concerning because if there's no check and balance in it, then it's just propaganda. And then there are other statements where if you look at it closely, you see that there is a very clear bias in her approach to this. I quote, "In the weeks since, the statement has caused Latter-day Saints on the far right, long accustomed to having their beliefs reflected by church leaders, to face the kind of cognitive dissonance that liberal members have had to contend with for decades." All right, first, so everyone who is accustomed to having their beliefs reflected, let's say politically is what she's saying, are on the far right. So that means her statement is saying that most of the statements from the brethren are on the far right. That's what she's saying. So where is she coming from? And why does she not bring up in the article when she's talking about people in Berkeley and other places, why does she not refer to others as being on the far left? Probably because she's sitting in the middle of it. So it's not far from her at all. Secondly, I think what she's saying overall here is true. Not on the far right, but people on the right, that when they have you have things like President Nelson getting the vaccine and saying to get the vaccine, that's a little bit of an issue, right, for people that are on the right. There's like, why did he do that? I don't understand that. I do believe that is a little bit what people on the left feel oftentimes with statements that are made by the church. You can go back also to, I think it was 2010, 2011, where the church supported immigration coming in through the Mexican border. I had several conservative friends that were not very happy about that comment. And so there's a little bit of a cognitive dissonance. It's like, wait a minute here. Aren't my conservative beliefs the exact same as what the church would tell me? No, they're not. Because the church is not conservative. The church is not liberal, not in a political sense. The church is trying to be followers of Jesus Christ. And let the chips fall where they may. Now, after the article was published, the author, Emily Kaplan, was on a podcast talking about it. I just have a 1-minute clip. I want you to listen to what she has to say.
We're in an age that is questioning the very nature of truth.
Okay, so I agree with her there. We're in an age that is questioning the nature of truth. And that she's going to bring up authority also. I think that's very true. The nature of truth, what's happening is the deconstruction of the truth. What's happening is personal experience. And this is all coming through academia. It's postmodernism. And it's you should pay close attention to this with language. I get hit by people on comments sometimes about $5 words and $10 words, etc., that I'm using. I use these words because, yes, I'm also talking to the academics when I do these episodes, especially on identitarianism, critical race theory, intersectionality, etc. Because if you don't, but I also am talking to you. If you don't know these words and you don't understand the language and what's happening here, you're not gonna be able to decipher what is really being said. This language needs to be learned and understood because it is entering very, very quickly into pop culture and into our everyday language. Postmodernism wants to say that there is no objective truth and that it's everyone's lived experience. That's their own truth. Sound familiar? She goes on here.
And I think that is playing out in the church as well. I could see, one potential future outcome being the rise of Mormonism as an ethno-religion in the same way that Judaism is. I think it's certainly possible as if you have, a growing number of people who aren't willing to say that the prophet or that the church as an institution has the last word on theological questions or questions that pertain to their specific lives, related to questions like sexuality being, one of the foremost ones right now, but people still very much valuing other aspects of Latter-day Saint history.
Okay, so basically, again, we're living in a time where truth is being broken down. The nature of truth is becoming suspect. I agree with that. That is exactly what is happening in our culture in the West, especially in the United States. That means that reason is getting pulled to the side. It's disintegrating. The Enlightenment, the things that we pulled out of the Enlightenment that were positive, they're not all positive, but that we pulled out of the Enlightenment, which are positive, are being stripped down and deconstructed. Postmodernism wants to go back prior to the Enlightenment and pretty much wipe out the Enlightenment. Critical race theory goes right along with that because out of the Enlightenment, the great fruit of the Enlightenment really was the founding of the United States and the idea of liberal democracy. And so critical race theory wants to tie those things to whiteness. Of course, they want to put a skin color on those things. But then she goes on and says something strangely about an ethno-centered church. It's just amazing to me how much race is on everybody's mind in journalism and academia, etc. As if, I think she's saying, it's going to be a white church. And that's just disgusting to me. That is horrific. Maybe I'm wrong. I'd love to hear from her if I'm wrong in saying that. Or maybe she means that we're going to be, she brings up the idea of Judaism. Well, that's really one ethno-centered place. Maybe she means multi-ethnicities with a black church and a white church and an Asian church, kind of like you get like with the Orthodox churches, a Greek Orthodox, a Russian Orthodox, etc. I don't know, but Her example was Judaism. I hope that's not what she means. Now, hopefully I'm going to have an interview with someone that is kind of on the inside of that article. And if we do that, we'll be doing that in the next couple of weeks. But we'll talk more specifically about what is it that is driving the rise of the liberal, I don't like the word, but that's the name of the article, the liberal or progressive Latter-day Saint, the identitarian Latter-day Saint, and what are the differences there as compared to the conservative Latter-day Saints. Thanks for listening.